and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, Senators. I have received an excuse from Senator Gibeon Ferdinand informing that he is unable to attend the sitting today. I beg to report that I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following motions and bills were passed in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Coronavirus Disease, 2019 Emergency Response Support Loan. Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Caribbean Digital Transformation Project. Gaming, Racing and Betting Amendment Act, Styrofoam and Plastic Food Services Containers Prohibition Amendment Act. The official funeral for the late Mr. Kenneth Foster, QC, CBE, will be held at the Minor Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, Castries, on Monday, 27th July 2020 at 2 p.m. The body will lie in repose at the House of Parliament in the Parliament Chamber from 9 to 1 p.m. That should be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Statements by ministers. Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, Justice and National Security. Madam Leader.
Madam President, fellow senators, good morning. I think it's incumbent on me to make a statement on the upsurge of the criminal activity that has plagued this country for over the last couple of weeks. I will try to give a synopsis of what is happening and try to make sure that persons outside understand the reasons for crime and what we can do to suppress the criminal activity that we have. So with your permission, Madam President, I would like to start by reading my statement. On Sunday, July 12, 2020, a young lady of the three young individuals. Two of them were celebrated for their lives, but we denounced the life of one of the young men. We blame the minister with responsibility for national security, the commissioner of police and his officers, the justice system, or the government of the day. But they failed to realize that the minister cannot direct the commissioner of police to monitor reduction before COVID-19, strengthening of the judicial system. We have to look at the issue of victimology or victimization. We must appreciate that crime is an interaction of perpetrator and victim. As such, we must study the relationship between the offender and the victim. There are three types of relative risk of victimization. One, low risk, are those individuals whose personal, professional, and social lives would not normally expose them to crime or threatening situations. Such victims have to be sought out by the criminal. Two, moderate risk, are those who, while generally of good reputation, have escalated the possibility of becoming a crime victim through their employment, example, working hours, your environment, etc. Lifestyles, example, meeting dates through the internet or bars, etc., or personal habits. Three, the high risk. Our victims are those with a lifestyle or employment that consistently exposes them to danger from criminal elements. Example, politicians, drug dealers, residential locations, sexual promiscuity, prostitution, etc. If the victim is categorized as high risk, the probability of profiling the offender is greatly diminished because the number of potential offenders is extremely high. The factors associated with the concept of victimology are as follows: age, sex, race, marital status, personality, your style, your characteristics, demeanor, social, sexual adjustment, and residence in relation to crime scenes. The police officers use the information in conjunction with the method with which the crime is perpetrated. They look at the modus operandi of the criminal, and modus operandi is really learned behavior. And the purpose of modus operandi are as follows: one, to ensure the success of the crime; two, to protect the offender's identification; and three, to effect the offender's escape. Then we have what is referred to as signature. This is the behavior which is unnecessary to successfully commit the crime. It is also referred to as the calling card of the criminal. And what happens there? It introduces the offender's personality into the crime. Unusual behavior characteristics. They are unique, ritualistic, repetitive behavior. Some of the examples of signature are as follows: posing. After you've killed somebody, you put the body in a position, overkill, using much more force than is necessary to kill the victim. The crime scene adjustment, placing things back in order, tells you that that person is very neat. Excessive bondage, scripting, leaving notes behind to be found. Mutilation. The analysis of the investigations will tell the police what took place and provide a reason or reasons for the crime. If the police get a picture of what happened, then the chances of solving the crime is enhanced. And let me just give an example, Madam President. There was a particular gentleman who used to break into houses at Monday Down. But every time he broke into the house, he would make sure that he empties the refrigerator. He would eat and drink everything that's in it. What he couldn't drink and eat, he would throw it outside. And that gave the police the clue. That was his signature. Although it wasn't necessary for him to do that, he had to leave a calling card for police officers to find out and say, well, okay, you're good enough investigate, but this is me. And so we have those sort of individuals in our society. Madam President, crime has become big business in this country. And I repeat, crime has become big business in this country. They are paid hitmen on island. We as a public have arrived at the point in our history that as long as you have money, you are automatically adored and respected. Even if we know all the sordid activities of those persons, they are feared because people know they can get injured if they cross those individuals. Our young men have seen and know about persons in high positions who are deeply involved in criminal activities but get a blind because they have money and the political currency. Our young men do not enjoy the proper family structure where they can receive the help and guidance that is necessary for the proper upbringing. As a consequence, they join groups where they receive attention and affections. In those groups, there are rules informing members how they should or should not behave. The problem arises when the focus of those groups changes drastically and they degenerate into gangs. In the Caribbean, we have what we refer to as street gangs and organized crime. Street gangs is defined as any durable street-oriented youth group whose involvement in illegal activity is part of the group identity. Durability means that a group has existed for more than a few months and continues to exist regardless of membership turnover. Illegal activity is the level above disorderly conduct or being a public nuisance. It refers to criminal action. The identity does not mean one's self-identity, but a sense of the group's characteristics apart from those of the individual members. Organized crime, on the other hand, is characterized by enterprise activity, the use of violence, actual or threatened, and corruption as typical means and exploitable relationships with the upper world. These activities involve the provision of illegal goods or services. Examples have included drugs, guns, and human trafficking, as well as extortion. Consequently, street gangs differ from organized crime groups in several ways. Gangs typically lack organization and have a centralized leadership. Members are more likely to be motivated by issues of status, while organized crime groups are often economically motivated. Street gang members are most likely to be operating on the ground, involved in neighborhood-level drug sales, while organized crime groups manage the wider distribution and trafficking of drugs. We have a large number of street gangs in St. Lucia, and they can be found all over the country. These gangs use young men to commit acts of violence to prove their loyalty and bravery. The more brazen the crime, the more respect they enjoy within the gang. We now have the existence of a number of gangs, like I said, in every nook and cranny of the island. The proliferation of shootings and killings are closely related to retaliation by one gang against the other gang. In many instances, it is a matter of respect. The police officers are aware of the existence of these gangs. They are working hard to attempt to control them. But these gangs have the intelligence to know when the police are wrong. We also hear the complaints that there are police officers who are corrupt and benefit from some of the criminal activity of the gangs. There are countries where criminal activity is minimal. We must therefore analyze why they have been successful in managing the crime issue. We are a democratic country, and it has been shown that the more freedom the citizens of a country enjoy, the greater the crime issue. Take a particular country where the First Amendment is enshrined in its constitution. The right to bear arms is always a hot topic. We have the large number of mass shootings. In some socialist and communist countries, crime is usually under control. One of the reasons is that all those freedoms that we enjoy are not permitted. I do not have the statistics at this time to have a full discussion on the attitude of those countries. We just have to look at the issue of this coronavirus to recognize that the countries which used draconian measures were the ones successful in managing the COVID-19 epidemic. The countries where they consider their personal rights to be superior to the welfare of the majority are the ones being impacted. A good example is the United States of America. The country of Taiwan must be looked at very closely. In that country, criminal activity is minimal. I am of the opinion that there are two main reasons for their success. One, the proliferation of CCTV and 2, the attitude of the people towards criminal activity. The government of Taiwan have invested millions in the technology associated with CCTV. But more importantly, the business places and private residences have all invested in CCTV. These private individuals allow the police to view the footage whenever the police requires permission to view that footage. In St. Lucia, some of those persons who have CCTV do not assist the police because they fear reprisals from criminals. I believe the government will now have to legislate changes to force an individual who possesses CCTV at their homes or place of business to allow the police to view the footage. As a people, the Taiwanese have decided that they will not tolerate criminal activity in the country, and as such they report every incident they encounter. They are not afraid of criminal reprisals because they are all in. In St. Lucia, the opposite exists. We have invested in CCTV, but it is limited. This budget, we were supposed to continue the installation of more CCTV, but COVID-19 has prevented us from doing so. We are presently looking at other ways of getting our CCTV installed. Our people do not give the police information because they say they are afraid of reprisals. They also indicate that they do not trust the police because some police officers give the names of the informants to the criminals. The only time they would like people to give the police information is when the crime has hit home. They plead with other people to assist the police to bring closure to the police investigation. We as a people are very critical to the actions of the police when their pursuing leads to solve crimes or to suppress criminal activity. They are extremely vocal when they believe their loved ones have been arrested or hurt by the police. When members of the public see police officers in the areas where they are clearly aware that they are criminal gangs, are extremely quick to report to the press that the police is targeting and harassing the children without cause. The criminal activity has reached levels that are unacceptable, and as such the police must step up its fight against the prevalence of criminal activity in our country. The preferred weapon of choice, as I said, is the gun. It is therefore imperative that the police officers must approach those criminals with caution, but never be afraid to engage those gangs. The Criminal Code Chapter 301, Section 30 states very clearly that an arrest with or without a warrant for a crime, a person may, with or without warrant or other legal process, arrest and detain any person whom he or she knows to have committed an indictable offense. An indictable offense means any offense permissible on indictment under the code or any other enactment. Example, grievous harm, other offenses involving violence. B, if the other person, having noticed or knowing that he or she is accused of an indictable offense, avoids arrest by resistance or flight, or escapes or endeavors to escape from custody, use any force which is necessary for the arrest, detention, or recapture, and may kill that other person if that other person cannot otherwise be arrested, detained, or retaken by other means. A person duly authorized by a warrant or other legal process to arrest or detain a person for committing an indictable offense may, if that other person has motive or believes that such warrant or other legal process is enforced against him or her, may use such force as is reasonable for his or her arrest, detention, or recapture, and may kill the other person if that other person cannot otherwise be arrested, detained, or retaken by other means other than the offense, through the offense which was committed by the other person. And no such offense has in fact been committed. That's how much power that the police has. That even if we have information and a warrant has been issued to you, that you have not actually committed the offense, and the police are pursuing you, and you refuse to give yourself up or challenge the police in any way, you can actually be killed. The Constitution solidifies what is said in the Criminal Code. The Constitution of St. Lucia 1979, Section 2 deals with the protection of right to life. A person shall not be deprived of his life intentionally, save in the execution of sentence of a court in respect of a criminal offense under any law of which he has been convicted. A person shall not be regarded as having been deprived of his life in contravention of this section if he dies as a result of the use of to such extent and on such circumstances as are permitted by law. of such force as is reasonably justified. A, for the defense of any person from violence or for the defense of your property. B, in order to effect a lawful arrest or to prevent the escape of a person lawfully detained. C, for the purpose of suppressing a riot, insurrection, or a meeting. Or D, in order to prevent the commission of by that person of a criminal offense, or if he dies as a result of a lawful act of war. We have the impacts report, but we must never be afraid to do the right thing. The force must carry out its duties with integrity, fairness, impartiality, and to the best of their ability. They must take full responsibility for and be prepared to explain and justify their actions and decisions. They must ensure that accurate records of their actions are kept as required by good practice, legislation, policies, and procedure, and take no actions knowing that it will violate the constitutional rights of any person, groups, or class or person. The police force has now had improved use of force policies. In that policy, we must make sure that it achieves the standard that police officers must follow. 1, at all times attempt to use only the minimal amount of force necessary to achieve the required results. 2, issue an oral warning before a firearm is used unless it is considered impracticable. 3, have to be responsible for the use of force. It must be justified and be based on honest belief that at the time the level of force was necessary. Madam President, I've said all this to tell the criminals involved in the upsurge of criminal activity that it will not be tolerated and serious action will be taken against them. As earlier stated, there are persons who are profiting from criminal activities. There are persons who purchase those firearms for those criminals. I know that the general public and the police officers know the gang members and hitmen, and they must deal, and these persons must be dealt with in a decisive manner. I thank you, Madam President.
Papers to be laid. Honorable Minister for Health and Wellness and Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 97 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, CPAL Holdings, Inc. Order. Statutory Instrument Number 98 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 9 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 99 of 2020, Excise Tax, Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 9 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 100 of 2020, Labor Layoff Period Extension Order. Statutory Instrument Number 101 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Tanya Nzingia Catherine Alexis Francis Order. Statutory Instrument Number 102 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Shanika Jovita Onika Danica Carrington Order. Statutory Instrument Number 103 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Simone Blanchard Bowman Order. Statutory Instrument Number 104 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Kelly Marie Thompson Order. Statutory Instrument Number 105 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Mark Anthony Fulford Order. Statutory Instrument Number 106 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Andre Sean Silburn Order. Statutory Amendment Number 107 of 2020, National Insurance Corporation, Economic Relief Program for COVID-19 Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 108 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Human Capital Resilience Project. Statutory Instrument Number 109 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital expenditure, Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program. Statutory Instrument Number 110 of 2020, National Savings and Development Bonds Act, Resolution of Parliament to raise funds by the issue of savings bonds, Statutory Instrument Number 111 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 10 Order, Statutory Instrument Number 111A of 2020, Emergency Powers Disaster COVID-19 Curfew Number 10 Order, Statutory Instrument Number 112 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Nasoma Monifa Komok Order, Statutory Instrument Number 113 of 2020, Legal Profession Eligibility, Maria Simmons Order, Statutory Instrument Number 114 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, Gion Holdings Incorporated Order, Statutory Instrument Number 115 of 2020, Public Health, Offensive and Hazardous Trades Amendment Regulations, Statutory Instrument Number 116 of 2020, Price Control Amendment Number 11 Order, Statutory Instrument Number 117 of 2020, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 10 Order, St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority Annual Report 2016-2017, St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority Annual Report 2017-2018.
Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to lay the following papers stand in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 95 of 2020, Electronic Transactions Act, Commencement Order. Statutory Instrument Number 96 of 2020, Tourism Incentives, Nico's Touring Services Limited Amendment Order. Thank you.
Motion. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government, and whereas it is further provided under Section 42(1) of the said Act, that there shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund all debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of $10,700,000 from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resources, SFR, to meet the ordinary capital resources, OCR, debt service obligations to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the first day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021, in order to preserve fiscal space and to be used to A, finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, B, bolster economic and social recovery. And whereas interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time, and whereas the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and conservative quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, first day of April, first day of July, and first day of October, commencing on the first due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or on a later due date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow $10,700,000 US dollars from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Reserve, SRF, to meet the ordinary capital resources, OCR, debt service obligations to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the first day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021 in order to preserve fiscal space and to be used to A, finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, B, bolster economic and social recovery. Be it further resolved that A, interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time. B, the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and conservative quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, first day of April, first day of July, and first day of October, commencing on the first due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or on a later due date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. Madam President, this resolution seeks approval to borrow $10.7 million US dollars from the Caribbean Development Bank to assist with meeting the ordinary capital resources debt service obligations to the CDB for the period October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. As we are aware, Madam President, countries around the world continue to collapse under the economic strain from COVID-19. We are currently in a situation where government revenue is less than 50%. Government revenue collection, Madam President, is less than 50%. And businesses continue, Kola Kutim, nothing has really changed for us here in St. Lucia in terms of our budget and expenditure, except where government have had to supplement income from many stimulus and social programs, including the much talked about NIC contributions. Governments continue to lose significant revenue, Madam President, from many sources, such as the tourism sector, the manufacturing sector, taxes, just to name a few of the sources that used to bring in revenue, and we no longer have this revenue coming in to the coffers of our treasury. Madam President, there is an additional burden placed on our healthcare system, a system that was already under tremendous pressure. And of course, at this time, this cannot go unnoticed. Our government was tasked with financing the operationalization of OKEU, including the move from Victoria Hospital to the new hospital, also activities that required all hands to be on deck, all frontline workers around the island, all wellness centers around the island had to pitch in to provide support at this critical time. All of that includes additional finances that must be sourced in order for us to contain this virus. Already, Madam President, the provision of quarantine and isolation facilities required added financial resources as well as hosting our Cuban medical staff. We had to finance their transportation to St. Lucia, and as we return them home in smaller batches, we also have to finance transportation costs. We have to finance them being here, Madam President, just to cut a long story short. But of course, we know how badly we needed these professionals to be here to assist us with our COVID effort. We also had to retrofit the Victoria Hospital, Madam President, to turn it into a respiratory hospital. And all of that was not budgeted for. This was all brought about by COVID-19. Madam President, all these pressures, coupled with the shortfall of revenue and the uncertainty presented in the current environment that we operate in, require that we maintain our debt servicing obligations, particularly from our key development partners, to encourage them to provide that necessary assistance at critical times when we may need the support even more than we do now. I know, Madam President, that there may be senators who want to remind us of our current deficit and the amount of borrowing that we have done to date. But, Madam President, given the unexpected COVID situation that all countries are faced with right now, if any of these critics, Madam President, can make recommendations that would put us in a situation where we do not have to borrow, and would put us in a better economic situation without compromising our social and economic recovery programs, then I invite them to make these recommendations, and they will be given consideration. The repayment terms on this loan, Madam President, is exceptionally favorable. And allow me to reiterate from the resolution that I just read that we have a grace period of 5 years before the first payment is due at a concessionary rate of 1% per annum with an extended maturity profile. Madam President, I wish our local banks would be as generous to us, the residents of this country, with those favorable interest rates that we are seeing come into this house of late. Of course, we must be grateful to them for, of course, assisting the government in our recovery effort. Madam President, the loan provides for an amount not exceeding $10,700,000 United States dollars from the special fund resources of the Caribbean Development Bank. Of course, a partner that's always come to our aid under this, at this critical juncture. It shall be repaid, Madam President, in 80 equal or approximately equal and conservative quarterly installments, commencing after the expiration of 5 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later date as the CDB may specify in writing. So, of course, we've seen a level of flexibility there, even at this point. The interest rate shall be paid at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the loan withdrawn and outstanding from time to time. Such interest shall be paid quarterly. The government of St. Lucia shall not be required to pay any commission on the loan, nor any commitment charge on the amount of this loan. The terms I just stated, Madam President, will augur favorably in terms of the impact of this loan on our financing costs and on our risk profile. Madam President, St. Lucia has been hailed as one of the best prepared countries in handling the advent of COVID-19 in the world. And given that at the Ministry of Health, we have spent in excess of $20 million that was not budgeted for on our quarantine facilities, on protective wear, in spite of the fact that we are getting so much assistance with our PPEs, medical facilities, and the Cuban medical personnel. But given the uncertainty of the impact of the virus, it is only prudent that we continue to preserve our fiscal space while simultaneously continuing to create social safety net programs and economic activity to sustain our economy and our people. Approval of this loan, Madam President, will allow our government to do just that. On this note, Madam President, through you, I submit this resolution for approval of my fellow senators. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow $10,700,000 US dollars from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resources, SFR, to meet the Ordinary Capital Resources, OCR, debt service obligations to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing from the first day of October 2020 and terminating on the 30th day of September 2021 in order to preserve a fiscal space and to be used to A, finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure, B, bolster economic and social recovery. Be it further resolved that A, interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the principal withdrawn and outstanding from time to time. B, The loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, first day April, first day of July, and first day of October, commencing on the first due date immediately following the expiration of 5 years after the date of the loan agreement, or on a later due date that the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader.
Madam President, we're not taking any comments on the matter.
I did not see any mics turned on.
Well, it was put to the vote immediately, Madam President.
No, I looked around. I looked around and there were no mics on. When did you put on your mic? Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 49(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may by resolution of Parliament borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for the capital expenditure of government, and whereas it is further provided under Section 42(1) of the said Act, that there shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund all debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of $45 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. And whereas the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. And whereas a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of A, the sum of 0.75% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 0.75% per annum. And whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of 10 years grace period, and whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of April and first day of October of each year, commensurate with A, 1% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2030, 2, and including the first day of April 2040, and B, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2042 and including the first day of April 2016. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of $45 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of I, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and II, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of April and first day of October of each year, commensurate with I, 1% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2032 and including the first day of April 2040, and II, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2040, 2 and including the first day of April 2060. Madam President, this resolution again similar to the last one, is seeking approval from the Senate to borrow the sum of $45 million from the International Development Association for our government to finance our Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. In this case, Madam President, the amount is higher at $45 million US, and of course it is being borrowed from the International Development Association. The objective of this project, Madam President, is to improve air transportation operational safety and navigation efficiency, and to enhance the resilience of St. Lucia's airport infrastructure. Madam President, this project is the result of recommendations stemming out of a disaster risk assessment conducted on our airport infrastructure, as well as a flood protection study. The assessment identified a number of weaknesses, Madam President, such as 1, high risk of river flooding at the Hewanora International Airport, which you are all familiar with, vulnerability of both airports to storm surges, and of course climate change impacts such as extreme weather temperatures. Revelations from the flood protection study include, but these are not limited to, 1, insufficient capacity of the drains along the Latuni River, which borders the Hewanora International Airport, its inability to handle heavy rainfall, and 2, Madam President, vulnerability to the impending threat of sea level rise, and recommendations have been made to take measures which would improve the resilience of the runway to future sea level rise. Also, Madam President, in 2013, St. Lucia was red flagged by the Universal Oversight Audit Program of the International Civil Aviation Organization over concerns of our inability to properly oversee the airports, aircraft, and air navigation services. St. Lucia scored a mere 16.67% in effective implementation of the International Civil Aviation Organization standard and recommended practice with regard to air navigation services, compared to a global average of 67.27%. Madam President, clearly this is unacceptable at best, and we must undertake this project to strengthen our air transport and airport infrastructure against climate change vulnerabilities and threats, and to secure these precious gateways to the rest of the world. In so doing, Madam President, our government has established the following 5 components under this project. Operational safety, Madam President, to improve the operational safety and flood disaster resilience of the runway at Hewanora International Airport, and to provide support for SLASPA's compliance with the International Civil Aviation Organization standards through the rehabilitation of the runway, the upgrade of marking and installation of an LED lighting system on the runway, the construction of a paved stopways and runway in safety areas, the improvement of airfield drainage, the improvement of crash fire rescue facilities, and the provision of technical assistance, all fall under this first phase, this first part of the project. The second component, Madam President, is the modernization of the air navigation system to improve air traffic safety and efficiency and strengthen resilience for air traffic navigation during bad weather through the modernization of air navigation systems. The third one, Madam President, is to strengthen institutional capacity at SLASPA to enable SLASPA's capacity to manage, develop, operate, and oversee its airports and air transport operations through a combination of technical assistance activities. Madam President, there's project management is another component to support SLASPA's project management activities through the establishment and operation of a project implementation unit at SLASPA. The final one is contingent emergency response. That is the establishment of a contingent emergency response component which makes provisions for accessing resources to immediately respond to a crisis or emergency as needed. Similar to the previous resolution, Madam President, and other IDA loans, This loan also presents extremely concessional terms and rates with a lengthy grace period of 10 years, a repayment period of 40 years, and a very low commitment fee of 0.5% on the unwithdrawn financing balance. Madam President, I present this resolution for approval of this Honorable House, Madam President. Thank you.
Leader of Opposition Business. Your mic was on, Senator. Your mic was on? It was on. That's why I called you.
Thank you, Madam President.
Were you asking me a question?
No.
Because I have to put it. I have to put it, yeah. Senators, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow an amount of US $45 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance is 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of April and first day of October of each year commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2030, 2 and including the first day of April 2040, and 2% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2040, 2 and including the first day of April 2060. Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I do not know how I missed the first motion, but I guess this morning's lack of concentration may have probably led to this. I don't know. But permit me, Madam President, some lead to, not to respond. I'm not responding to the Minister of National Security presentation as it relates to crime, but to convey my sympathies and condolences to the many families who are suffering or mourning loss at this time. I have friends in Sarah that I personally visited where the 2 young men got shot, and I walked, blood-stained footpaths leading to the homes where those killings took place, Madam President, as well as only 2 days ago I visited the grandmother of a young man who was shot in cul-de-sac, and to see the bullet holes through the stove and kitchen cupboards of a very small apartment. Madam President, while walking through those communities and seeing the mourning, the crying, the tears pouring on the faces of families, it continued to tell me my presence here, I need to continue to echo and to speak loud on behalf of those who are marginalized and those who are vulnerable and I continue to look towards the government walking that path as it relates to our vulnerable population. Madam President, I heard the minister spoke of it is really not, his crime is really not as a result of where he's sitting. There's so much he can do. But in previous years, I used to hear persons calling on the Minister of National Security, the then Prime Minister.
Senator,
Yes.
I remind you the debate at hand.
Yes, Madam President, I am just finishing this point. But just to highlight, Madam President, if it worth anything, Madam President, what I would like to see happen as it relates to crime is one.
Senator,
Yes, Madam
as
President.
I said, the debate at hand is resolution, and I don't want to read the whole thing out again. Do I need to?
Thank you, Madam President. I'll take leave and I will maybe find if it comes up in anything I say down the road. But Madam President, the matter before us, the issue of borrowing for the airport. Madam President, in a previous debate, as it relates to borrowing for the remodeling of terminals to accommodate visitors, the debate and the content and the rationale then had to do with visitors not getting wet and how we want to treat visitors coming to St. Lucia in a better manner. And Madam President, then the question was asked, where's the master plan? Madam President, I knew then that the direction this thing was, what was being considered, they were finding themselves in some major problems as it relates to drainage issues. Viewport have serious issues as it relates to drainage, and I realized then, from a professional standpoint, that the approach for remodeling, you would have to end up. And what you have this morning, I hear the justification for borrowing more to deal with disaster mitigation, to deal with drainage issues. Madam President, there are examples of similar interventions under this administration. And the Rosedom is an example. The Rosedom is an example where a project was conceptualized at $40-something million, but has now moved up to $60-something million. And as the hands of the second hand of a clock goes, the cost continues to move up. I spoke to this way back then, Madam President, and if all of this, an airport. Madam President, I still have not seen a master plan. I have not seen any broad plan suggesting what the government is doing as it relates to Uranora International Airport. And this is almost firing in the dark. Madam, similar projects in the region has, example, the Piaco International Airport. The story behind this airport and what is going on right now, it is really a sad situation. Madam President, this approach to Uranora International Airport is not consistent with good practices. And Madam President, it reminds me, the presentation made by the leader of government business in terms of risk and vulnerability. Madam President, the PPP, the public-private partnership arrangement that was in place, the government was taken away from having that risk. The team would have covered that. So the government was not responsible for insuring the airport. For 30 years, they were responsible for it. We would not have to be concerned about hurricanes and storms because the concessionaire would be responsible for it. But now the airport continues to evolve. And Madam President, this is tied in with the idea of it is a stimulus activity. I've heard the discussion. Our economy is doing badly. Revenue, we are not getting revenue. the previous statement made, it has to do with bolstering our social and economic review, and I emphasize social, Madam President, because we can see what is happening to us socially as a country, the crime and violence that we're dealing with, our people, Madam President, where they are right now, and the government has embarked $120 million road, $60 million airport, $600 million airport, $60 million in terms of other activities to stimulate the economy. Madam President, anybody with a basic idea of construction economics would say, for a small island state, with the volume of what we do and the activities, those construction activities, would not stimulate the economy. In fact, any slight attempt or possibility to stimulate the economy, some of the practices I'm aware of, where one contractor is implementing 3 roads using the same team. He's doing it in Formagé, he runs to Saltibus, he goes back to another place. How could that stimulate the economy? When you're using construction is expected to be widespread, you get as many persons as possible to participate. That's how you do construction activity to stimulate the economy, but not with that kind of construction activity. Not with that kind of construction activity. Not with asphalt. Not with asphalt. You do not stimulate the economy by placing asphalt on roads. Hundreds of millions of dollars of asphalt. And then, Madam President, we speak of the people and their suffering as if we care about it. We care about them. Madam President, this government has not demonstrated, and there's almost a lot of confusion as it relates to what is being presented, the narrative, and what exactly is being done. Madam President, will continue to go down. In a few months coming, we will continue to go down. The issue of crime is getting worse. Our young men are not being engaged. The construction of the airport will not engage those guys who are there on the block. No. The social recovery activity is deeper than this, Madam President. An example of such a program, Back on Track Ministry. Back on Track Ministry. We gave institutional strengthening to Back on Track Ministry who went into the prisons to get persons back into society. And I recall the Minister of National Security was present at one such ceremony at a particular church. Where are programs like these? Where are programs like these? You were invited just to say a few words. But guess what? We've ended these programs. This program started with us. We've ended these programs. Where's Back on Track now? We've produced ministers in the gospel. We've rehabilitated a number of ex-convicts who are right now producing in St. Lucia through that program, Back on Track, because we are the SSDF, the government, decide to give the program institutional strengthening through the special framework of assistance 99 on the European Union. Where is it? We abandon programs that help to restore lives. And then we talk about crime, and we invest in millions on roads that bring you to nowhere at this point in time, when our traffic is less. Madam President, if a chef is in a kitchen preparing food and he's not serving those on the outside, then he's only preparing food for himself. Why are those programs? What is the need at this time for these programs? The airport, what is the need? Where are they going? Who is traveling? Qui moun ki ka voyager? Exil a tenu bay pour faire pour un airport. Combien l'argent qui brise en point exactement? Why put the country through this?
level of debt. And why rush it in the way that you're doing it? Because you've not prepared the master plan. You are not ready. You are doing things piecemeal. You came, you spoke about the terminal. Now you're back up on the runway and talking about disaster mitigation methods. Because we experienced a 1 in 100 year storm and see what happened. Madam President, one of the biggest concerns that I have with the posture of this administration, we are not right now in the hurricane season. We are in the hurricane season. And Madam President, doing some lost adjusting in Dominica following Hurricane Maria, I saw what the infrastructure looked like when the hurricane passed. It took roads and it went away with roads. The airport was fully covered. Dominica lost bridges and the infrastructure disappeared. Madam President, we can put these things on pause, but we cannot put the lives of individuals on pause. We cannot. The days of the lives of our children and the young men of the block, every opportunity to change their life, we miss it forever. But we could have said COVID-19 is upon us. Some young mothers cannot get to give their children newborn milk. Some people cannot give their senior mothers, their senior people adult pampers. We know that. They are crying every day in the communities. You can't put the road on pause and try to save some lives. Can't do this. Madam President, if you walk through Sarat where those 2 young men live, if you walk there, you would see world-class problem of poverty, not just in those who live there, the homes, the footpaths, the environment is what it is. The truancy of our young people, the hanging, there are blocks all over. Every corner, there are blocks. Young men just doing nothing. And based on what I've heard the Minister of National Security describe, they are persons looking for business. There's crime business. So people are being hired as hitmen. He's described it. And what we do? What do we do? What do we do? You've described it, but what is the response? Asphalt? Hundreds of millions of dollars laid asphalt when our people, our social fabric is decaying at such a rapid rate? Madam President, the size of the living room where this boy was shot in cul-de-sac is not a 12 by 12, it's probably 8 by 6. The grandmother and the children were sitting in the living room when the shooter walked in. They are not like long ago where people were hiding to commit crimes. They come to get you. But I'm not hearing the interventions by government to respond in a COVID time. I'm not hearing our people are being cared for. I'm not seeing the programs. I'm not hearing from the government. That is being treated lamely. And the fact, the monies that are being borrowed are to do things that can disappear through a hurricane. The hundreds of millions of dollars that we're spending now, a hurricane can take everything away and wash it away. It happened to Dominica. 200% of GDP disappeared. That's what the experts said. Start back from scratch. The investment we made in the lives of our people at this time can never go wasted. And there's an opportunity to do it now. Madam President, there are children going to early childhood centers where $70 need to be paid a term. And if they miss out on that early stimulus to prepare them for the primary school education, which is free and universal, it is said, the research says that they do not adapt properly. And these same children who do not get to early childhood center, the ones who usually drop out at Form 3, they're usually the ones who get on the block. They're usually the ones who get into the criminal activity. Early childhood education, $70. We still have children who are not going to early childhood centers in COVID. When at this point, parents not able to pay that $70. I've not heard a statement as to how we will assist those toddlers, those children, because there's no advocacy for children. None. Nobody speaks about them because they don't vote. I wish there would be a miracle to see them pick up placards and come down to Castries and say, why is it that secondary school education is free and why is primary school education is free and I'm supposed to pay to go to my little preschool? I wish there was a miracle to see this. But instead of addressing the lives of our people, instead of addressing our children plight, instead of addressing the single mothers and the hardship that they're going at this point in time, you're going to borrow millions of dollars and you're rushing everywhere to place asphalt and concrete that can disappear, be washed away through a hurricane. Like what happened in Dominica. Everything can disappear. And Madam President, the sad thing about it, the sad reality is that, Madam President, you can pause this, but you cannot pause on children's lives. Madam President, when the child moved from 0 to 5 and the child did not get on a swing, that child missed the experience for his or her entire life. A swing. We cannot, Madam President, put our people's lives on pause, but we can pause. We can keep these projects behind and focus on the attention on saving our people. I know we cannot do, there's so much we can do about crime. There's so much we can do on crime, and I do not blame you for crime. I understand the pressure upon you and the police in dealing with crime and how complex this thing is. But there are some things we can do, and I think we are not doing it. We are ignoring the young men on the block. We are ignoring them. I don't know who we leave them for. And then, Madam President, when a 70-year-old who knows nothing except living a peaceful life, when a 70-year-old needs to be greeted with gunshots in a little apartment because her grandson is entangled, and you get there and you see she tie her head weeping. Madam President, another mother in Odsa who lost her son, you know, on the roadside. I got there on the spot when she held my shirt, all the buttons torn up, and she fell on the ground. You know, and I could imagine the loss of a 19-year-old, and that's her only son. He went to buy a float across the road in Odsa, and to call her and said, son is dead. I got there, Madam President, and she held my shirt too, and she just left her weight on my shirt, buttons torn apart. Madam President, there's something we can do. COVID-19 provides us with an opportunity to go people focused. Madam President, we should give a break on people paying for early childhood centers at this point in time. That is too small. That we cannot handle. That's not $100 million. That's not $10 million. We're spending $120 million for asphalt road and trying to collect from the citizens $10 million to send their children to preschool. Madam President, the estimates of expenditure, if you look at it, each one of them have a subvention to preschool, $1,000 for the year, $1,000, $2,000, $1,000, $2,000. And you tell me they are the future of tomorrow? We believe that? Madam President, under grandson contribution, look at the early childhood centers and see what is there. A total of 52,000, each one of them getting $1,000 or $2,000. Our children. Madam President, we've turned this thing about governance upside down. Upside down. And I do not know who the chefs are serving, but it's not those who are waiting for food. I think they're feeding themselves. But if you are a chef and you're in the kitchen, is to serve those on the outside. What is on the menu for those who are sitting out there? What is on the menu? Asphalt? Concrete? Steel? Madam President, when things were very good, when things were, I don't want to say very good, Madam President, on the best times, Madam President, since I've been in this government business and serving for people over 25 years, I can recall one of the better days, Madam President, when there are parents who would come crying with their book list. Crying, they couldn't make it. And Madam President, the SSDF could buy school books to give to them. In COVID-19, we didn't only give them the good books, we had a laptop on it for them to purchase for their children. We had a laptop on it. When things were better, they could not afford to purchase school books. During COVID, you had a laptop on the book list. You know what you're telling you? This is a certain you're communicating to the parents. Pa laptop zodble, by ish zotli. This is what you're telling them because you know very well they cannot afford it. You know very well some of them cannot afford to buy the school books, let alone a laptop. But you put in the laptop on a book list for them? Now I'm speaking to the issue of bolstering. Yeah, the airport. And the decisions we make as it relates to our expenditure, the choices that we make right now. The airport. Yes, our children need to take off too. You understand? They are not metal. They are not the metal birds. But as they right now, they are caterpillars, they too have to fly and become butterflies. So in the metaphor of airports, and what you cater for, the metal birds that you cater for, let us cater for our children that they too will have wings to fly. Do not miss the opportunity, because when we miss the opportunity, we miss it forever. We cannot go back to them once we have missed it. So, Madam President, what we see, what we get, is that they don't go to preschool because of $70, but by the time they get to 17, we need to embark on programs spending a lot more to address the issues as a result of not spending $70 on them. So our social interventions, what we spend in terms of providing ammunition and for the police, you know, to address them, the expensive lawyers and the judges, you know, the millions of dollars to address crime and violence, because maybe, Madam President, we choose not to spend $70 for a child for school, for preschool. Madam President, I would love to be in a government where preschool, early children going to school are not allowed to pay. Early childhood centers become free. Madam President, I would love to be in a government where the St. Lucian people, where our young men on the block, are not characterized or made to feel that they are inadequate in spite of their errors. I worked with Dr. King on RISE, and I've been around a lot of the blocks working. I'm being paid a salary at SSDF, but I enjoyed it, trying to change lives and get people back into our society. I enjoyed it. It's a good thing to do because we're doing it for our people. We need to get back to these things. Because if we don't, what has transpired at cul-de-sac, what is going on in the other communities, the gun violence will only increase. And God forbid, you know, this thing is happening, Madam President. I'm ending, Madam President. It's happening everywhere. And we can be at risk. Our children can be at risk. You know, Madam President, I ask the government to discontinue this approach.
Senator, you have 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes. Thank you, Madam President. 15 more minutes. I thought I had less. Yeah, well, I know you're concerned about the airport. You love the airport. You see, a lot of the young men, Madam President, their skill set, most of them are secondary school. They may have dropped out at Form 3. They can do something in terms of reading and writing. They have alternate interest. But also, Madam President, there is a distraction taking place as it relates to construction activity and who is making the money. Who is making the money? So you invite them to work and they see that they must work and you tell them you pay them $80 a day or $50 a day. And these days, Madam President, the procurement largest by this government has allowed a fancy approach. A fancy approach, and Madam President, this requires somebody to intervene because a young lady, Madam President, who was given a contract for $25,000 came to me and she said, I got a contract for $25,000. Miss Henry, guess how much they gave me at the end? I said, how much? $8,000? Let me know I got $3,000. Madam President, this is sending the wrong signal in the community where those young men are. Wrong signal. And Madam President, growing up poor, I understand poverty and I know we have good coping skills. Our people can cope. But one of the things that is disturbing St. Lucians at this point in time is when politicians or parliamentarians or government systems go into communities where poor people live and are coping and help those who are better off than them. It distracts them. And all of a sudden they want to queue up to get it too. That's what's happening in our society, and that is brilliant crime.
Senator, I remind you of 37 more.
Yes, Madam President, I'm wrapping up. So, Madam President, the airport, from any construction logics, tells me that there's not been a master plan. The government is coming in bits and pieces. It's now moving almost to $750 million. We are now $600 million worth of investment on an airport. That's already an international airport. People are coming in. It has contributed the wealth. I do not know what is the risk, what is the urgency at this point in time. In a COVID world, law, pani pièce là, you say you're not getting revenue. Your revenue is from the airport. You know, so you have a shop, Madam President. Your shop is not making any money. Instead of thinking of closing it, you say that you're going to extend it. You're going to extend it because your shop, there are some people who are closing their shops because they're not making money. So on your petit boutique qui pas fait pièce là, Covid, moun pas venir acheter. C'est là qu'on peut là pour faire pligo. Mais on est là pour jeter comment? Eh ben de laisser pas shop là ou vle gondi ou l'autre trésor ou ka faire. It is the other reason that you have doing it that St. Lucians must know. And that is why St. Lucians must speak. And when the questions is asked, the young men must not be called ex-convict. They must not be referred to because they too have their voice. They too are citizens of St. Lucia. Everybody must speak and we must encourage them to speak, to expose what is wrong in this country. Only then we would have a better country. The more persons who speak in this country, the better we'll become. But we need to expose things for what they are. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Mangal.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I stand in full support of this motion brought in by this government of St. Lucia to borrow $45 million for the Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. And Madam President, we need to make very special note of that because they want us to believe that we're borrowing money for an airport, for the same airport in Vieux-Fort that we've borrowed so much more to do before, Madam President. But under this arrangement, Madam President, we are not borrowing money for the Hiranora International Airport solely. We are not, Madam President, and that is what they refuse to allow or tell the people of St. Lucia. Madam President, and I will read through the notes again, Madam President, of the leader of government business. There are 5 different categories of which things that are to be done with that $45 million US. Number 1, Madam President, operational safety, improvement of the operational safety and flood disaster resilience of the runway at HIA, and to support SASPA's compliance with the International Civil Aviation Organization standards through the rehabilitation of the Hiranura International Airport runway, the upgrade of marking and installation of LED lighting systems on the runway, the construction of paved stopways and runway end safety areas, the improvement of airfield drainage, the improvement of crash fire rescue facilities, our fire appliances, Madam President, the provision of technical assistance, that's on the 1. Madam President, on the 2, modernization of the air navigational system, improvement of air traffic safety and efficiency, the strengthening of the resilience for air traffic navigation, bad weather through the modernization of air navigational systems. Is that the construction of just a terminal? Madam President, the PPP that the opposition speaks about, Madam President, was specifically for the construction of the Hiranura International Airport terminal building and parking apron facilities, Madam President. Not this, Madam President. Not this arrangement. All right? But they want us to believe, they want St. Lucia to believe that we're borrowing money to do the airport and to do the terminal building, and then we're going back and we're borrowing another set again to do the very same thing, Madam President. I move on to number 3. Madam President, strengthen institutional capacity, strengthening of the institutional capacity of SLASPA in managing, developing, operating and overseeing its airports and air transport operation through a combination of technical assistance activities. That is providing support to the very organization, St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority. Madam President, and I must take this opportunity to congratulate SLASPA with its safety record and its efficiency record in managing the air and seaports of this country. And today, Madam President, this government, with its foresight, is providing the support that is required financially and logistically to help further strengthen that entity, Madam President, in dealing with its air support system and its air traffic control measures, Madam President. Number 4, project management. Support for SLASPA's project management activities through the establishment and operation of a project management implementation unit. Does that have to do with asphalt and concrete and steel, Madam President? What does that have to do with asphalt and concrete and steel? Right? Okay? You are now investing in the very human resource development of the staff of SLASPA, Madam President. That is what is being done there. That is not concrete and steel, but I will come back to the concrete of steel and steel in a while, Madam President. So we're investing in the establishment of project implementation units. And number 5, Madam President, contingent emergency response. It includes a contingent emergency response component that makes provision for assessing resources to immediately respond to a crisis or emergency as required. Again, that has to do with investment in human resource and stimulation exercises and in other things of that nature, Madam President. So where it is that we are investing $45 million in just concrete and steel, Madam President? No, we are not. We are investing in SLASPA for the overall development of our air traffic control systems, the infrastructure of our air traffic control, and to ensure we have a holistic development and a holistic approach. Now, talking about holistic development and holistic approach, Madam President, they say there's no master plan. The opposition has been saying there's no master plan. But ask them, when SASPA invited them to view the master plans, where were they, Madam President?
Exactly.
Why didn't they go to SLASPA? That is why they don't know there's a master plan. Because they refuse to attend to the business of this country, the very people that they're supposed to represent. Right. So they will not go to SLASPA and view the master plan, but they will come in this honorable house and say there's no plan. Yeah. Madam President, tell them, I'm inviting them on behalf of SLASPA, go to SLASPA and ask for the master plan. It is there, and go and view it. It is there. Go and view the master plan, Madam President. So we are developing with a master plan. So, Madam President, they wanted to deal with just the apron and the terminal building, but we've gone further. We've placed properly, Madam President, a system in place for the development of the Hiranura International Airport. We've had a loan financed by the Taiwanese, and work have started, Madam President. And this is what? This is why they're so fearful.
Yeah.
Because for 5 years, Madam President, they went about designing and consulting and designing and consulting and designing and consulting on a PPP, Madam President. But did they lay one block on the ground?
No.
Nothing, Madam President. But this government, Madam President, have started the Hiranura International Airport Redevelopment Program.
That's the point.
Right? And work is happening on the ground. And I invite the opposition to tour with me to the Hiranura International Airport to view firsthand the work that is happening on the ground. That is what, Madam President, we are not a government of talk, but we are government of action.
That's right.
We are government that implements on behalf of the people of this country, Madam President. We don't only speak, but now I'm going to come to the concrete and steel, Madam President. Madam President, you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel, okay? Unless the opposition has some magic that they're not telling us. All they'll tell us, oh, we invested in concrete and steel. But what are your recommendations? In this time, what will you invest in? Tell us. Madam President, I've said it here before, and I'm going to say it again. In every economy, major developed economy in the world, like the United States, etc., Madam President, when there is a depression, when there's a recession, you inject capital into the economy, right? You reduce on taxes, Madam President, okay? And you provide incentives to the people, okay? Why do you inject capital into the economy? It's to stimulate economic growth, Madam President. It's to create activity within the economy, right? What does construction do? Madam President, in 2008 in the United States, when President Obama came in the time of the Great Recession, what did they invest in? Major infrastructural projects, Madam President. Okay? Major infrastructural, but you see, they do not understand the concept and the impact of that, Madam President. They do not understand. They speak about crime and young men on the block and so on, and crime is being committed because there's the need for them to have something to do. And Madam President, I must sympathize with the young men that were the people that have been killed over the last few days and weeks in this country. But I must also inform the opposition that this did not start last week, Madam President. Neither did it start in 2016. So what did they do before? They didn't have crime statistics under their watch. There was. And, all right? And what plan did they have then? What did they do then? But Madam President, this is where the synchronization of construction, infrastructure, agriculture, and so on can help in the reduction of crime. Because when you have an economy where there is activity, where there is work for people, Madam President, you will obviously have person engaged in other activities rather than sitting on a block and having crime and committing crime. And construction, Madam President, when you invest in concrete and steel, when you invest in asphalt, that was mentioned, what are the components of asphalt? What type of material do you use to make asphalt? You use stones, you use sand. Where is the sand coming from? A sand pit somewhere in St. Lucia. Who's actually been employed in the sand pit in St. Lucia? All right? Persons in St. Lucia are employed in the sand pits in St. Lucia, and there is greater economic activity there, which will filter to their homes and which will filter down, even down to the preschool children. Okay, because the preschool children will get a better meal to go to school, Madam President, because they benefit from that extra activity that is happening in the sand pit. Yes, in the sand pit. And where is the stones coming from, Madam President? The stone is coming from a quarry. Are we importing the stones? We're not importing the stones. The stones are coming from St. Lucia again, Madam President. So you have more stones required, you will have more persons employed in the quarry, right? You will have more persons taking a paycheck and going home with it. You will have more corporate taxes being paid. The government will collect more money, Madam President, to be able to finance its social programs. That is what they do not understand. The very social programs you talk about. How do you finance it if you do not create economic activity? Tell me. How do you finance the social programs? Especially in a COVID season. Tell me. Madam President. So that is how construction helps stimulate activity in the economy. Okay? And of course, when you have construction work happening on the airport, you are actually employing more construction workers in St. Lucia. But they will not understand that. They talk about roads happening there, roads happening over there. One contractor doing this there, another contractor doing that there. Or one contractor having free jobs. One here, one over there, one over there. Okay? But you know, Madam President, they are the ones who's most guilty of this. They are the ones who's most guilty, Madam President. In the last 5 years, between 2011 and 2016, how many contractors did they employ in St. Lucia?
Only one.
One contractor. One contractor. And that contractor
Senator, let me remind you of 37-1.
Yes, Madam President. Yes, yes, Madam President. I'm just trying to tie it in with the whole construction activity of the airport, Madam President. So when you employ one contractor, obviously, you're not going to have the filtering effect, especially if that one contractor has all his equipment, all his trucks, all his quarry, all his sandpit, and so on. But this is not what this government is doing. This government has empowered all of the contractors in this country.
We're spreading the love.
There's even, you remember how long ago, Madam President, Bedford truck was in this country? If you go, even all equipment in this country is now on the road. All equipment, all trucks, every single household that has a truck, right, is being employed, and that person could have employment and bring income to his family, to be able to feed his wife and the very preschooler, Madam President, being referred to. Okay? There's even a Bedford truck on the road from the 1960s, and it's back on the road. That's to show you there's probably even a need for additional equipment, and that gives our local contractors, Madam President, the ability to grow and the foresight to be able to have more capacity. This is what this government is doing. This government is growing capacity among the young people of this country. So while we are developing the airport, which is very necessary, Madam President, while we're developing a road network that is very important, we are also, Madam President, empowering our young people. Empowering our people. And so that is why we support the loan arrangements for the airport, because the government has full control of that airport facility for the next 30 years. On the day arrangement, a foreign entity would have had control of that airport, Madam President, for 30 years. And that is the thing they don't know. That is the foresight they don't have. Oh, in COVID, there's no tourists coming. There's less vehicles on the road. So why we have to fix the road? And why do we have to fix the airport? It's so true. So you see, that is the problem. That is the problem. When you have a dearth of activity and you're looking to expand on your operation, you take that opportunity. You take that time and that opportunity to be able to redirect, to expand on your operation. And that is why I shouted across there, well, let the little cabaret become a Marcia as well. Because while the little cabaret, you are suggesting that there's no economic activity, and to close the little cabaret, Marcia and the other likes is looking to take more market share, Madam President. Okay? Why not encourage the tea cabaret? Encourage them to grow. And this is what this government is doing, empowering these people in this country to grow. You know? But these are the two different ideologies, Madam President. You have this government who are looking to empower people. But you're looking at another side that is looking to give you a bread. I am the master, so you must come to me, and every time I must give you a bread, and you must bow to me each time. But this government, Madam President, is developing the infrastructure of this country, is developing its people, and it's empowering its people with the phrase, right? Let me teach you how to fish, and then you'll fish forever. Against the other side, that is saying, come to me, I'll give you a fish today, and you see after yourself tomorrow, Madam President. So, let me summarize by saying, this loan, Madam President, and I must really congratulate the Honorable Minister of Finance and Prime Minister for being able to obtain loans at such concessionary rates in this country, Madam President. This is almost unprecedented. When I look at those interest rates, Madam President, 10 years. So you're getting a loan at 1% interest for the first 10 years, right? And then at the second 10 years or 20 years, you're paying 2% interest. And you're getting a moratorium of 10 years before you pay. Where can you get those concessionary loans, Madam President? And it's not to go and to dump into some kind of festival, and where you cannot determine what is the impact. Right? I'm not trying to say we should not invest in social programs and carnival and festivals, but I'm just simply saying that this is also very necessary. You are investing in protecting what is key to you. Madam President, this country depends heavily on tourism. Yes. There is no doubt about that, right? Okay? And since we depend heavily on tourism, we must have the infrastructural base in order to have our tourists come in. Not because they are not coming in droves today. Yes. That doesn't mean if there is a vaccine tomorrow for coronavirus that they will not come in droves tomorrow. Exactly. They will come, Madam President. And of course, once we've invested in our infrastructure, and we've placed in all the necessary components together, we would have had the platform to be able to welcome them and welcome them in droves. And to be able now to go out there and vociferously market that product, because we have the platform and we have the infrastructure. That is what they do not understand. So that is why international countries, Madam President, are building roads in the night and not during the day.
That's right.
Okay? Because the traffic is less. So when you say that the traffic is less and we should not be building roads, or there is no tourists coming in and we should not be developing the airport, I tell you, you're wrong. This is the best time, because this is how every single developed country does it, Madam President. At the lowest peak, at the lowest times, this is when they carry out the infrastructural work. And this country, this government, is actually scoring a dose battle, if you want to put it this way. Okay? Because we are creating economic activity that otherwise they would have been bamboozled to know how to upkeep an economy in this coronavirus season. They have not offered any solutions. But we must know that our people, we must create economic activity while we do not have all of the tourists coming in. And what better way to do it, Madam President, than through construction? Construction generates a lot of income, a lot of revenue over a short period of time for persons. What better way to do it than through construction, and to interact it with agriculture, Madam President? And in the Prime Minister's brilliant budget presentation, Madam President, he made mention and he covered agriculture, he covered construction, he covered tourism. And we've been said that, oh, we're not looking after the young men, we're not dealing with the social programs. Just go. Obviously, they did not listen to the social package that the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance quite eloquently presented some 2 Sundays ago. They need to go back and listen, Madam President. And if they listen to that program, they would probably just say, you know what, we surrender and we support this government 100%, because this government has the plan for the development of this country. This government has the plan for the development of the airport in Beaufort. This government today, through this $45 million US loan, has provided a comprehensive approach of the design and the structuring of our whole air traffic and air components for the next 30 years and beyond, Madam President. And with that, I fully support this, and I say bravo to the government. I thank you.
Senator Thomas Francis.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Greetings, fellow senators and citizens in the gallery, staff of Parliament. Madam President, I would like to echo the sentiments expressed by members before me regarding the recent spate of crime in this country. Madam President, 5 deaths in 1 week is a lot. Crime is an issue for us, and I am very heartened that the Minister of Home Affairs presented a statement on that issue this morning. And it is hoped that the correct strategies will be employed such that we can resolve this issue. Because if we do not resolve the issue, all the good work that we've done in this country will come to naught. So I wish you well, Mr. Senator, and in resolving that particular issue. Madam President, we have had the opportunity before today to discuss funding for the redevelopment of Uranora International Airport. I have expressed my perspective, Madam President, in some level of detail in terms of the pros and cons of the development. Madam President, I am still of the firm belief that there is need for the redevelopment of the airport. There are aspects of the facility that need attention. Health and safety is a significant aspect. Security is an aspect. And also, Madam President, to provide the required level of comfort for the visitors that visit our store. So I am still of the view that we need the redevelopment of the airport. My concern, Madam President, continues to be the extent to which we are investing in that development. And more so, Madam President, because we are in a COVID environment and there's so much uncertainty around the fiscal situation of St. Lucia in the short, medium, and even long term, I have even greater trepidations in terms of the extent of the investment. Madam President, as you would recall, we came to this honorable house and we approved a facility to the extent of $100 million US. We subsequently came and approved another facility of 202.5 million EC dollars by way of a 20-year loan via a consortium of local banks, local and regional banks. Madam President, the facility which we are debating today, the $45 million facility which we are debating, will bring the total debt relative to the airport development to 593 million EC dollars. Madam President, I appreciate the comment made by the senator before me that an element of this quantum represents funding to provide for SLASPA to get some technical assistance to manage the airport, and as a result, this amount has been tagged on to the 593 million. Madam President, I want to hasten to say that it's a bit mind-boggling that a company with the kind of strength, an entity with the kind of financial strength of SLASPA, because I took time, I went through the financial statements. SLASPA has reserves of $100 million. SLASPA has cash of $12 million in the financial statement. Suffice it to say, Madam President, the financial fundamentals of SLASPA is very strong, and SLASPA has been one of the quasi-entities that have been the most prosperous in the history of St. Lucia. So in terms of liquidity, profitability, steadiness of earnings and so on, we have no issues. So it is mind-boggling as to why it is we would need to borrow funding over a period of 40 years to assist LASPA with technical support relative to the airport. I don't quite understand it. So, Madam President, so the quantum, I still have an issue with that. I would have thought that given the uncertainty that we are experiencing as a country, that maybe we would have scaled down, looked at opportunities to scale down the project, look at opportunity to see whether we can build it in phases. You build the most critical phases now, and when we are sure as to what our economic situation will be, then we go back and we revisit the other phases. That is an approach, Madam President, that I believe is sensible and prudent. So, Madam President, I'm not sure whether consideration was given to that approach. When the fiscal fundamentals of the country are strong, then we can take a chance and determine that, we can be extravagant. But when there's the grave uncertainty that we speak of, and the fact that we already have a situation where we are not sure about earnings, we are not sure, our debt stock is increasing, GDP is projected to decline significantly as per the IMF reports and central bank reports and other agencies. one would expect greater prudence in that regard. Madam President, the other concern that I have is that the cost of the project. Up to now, Madam President, I'm not sure that I fully understand how much the project is going to cost us. I remember asking that question some time ago, and I was told outside of these chambers, I was told that the project would cost 175 million US dollars. That was the cost that I understand. Madam President, with the additional sum that we are debating here today, we are looking at 220 million. The project cost has escalated. Well, at least, not the cost, because I'm not sure up to now what the total cost will be, but the borrowing that we're discussing is increasing by another approximately 100 million. So it would give me some comfort, Madam President, if I had a sense as to what the total cost of the project will be. We are almost at 600 million, and there is no certainty as to what the total cost will be. So is there an expectation that we will have to come back to this House to approve additional funding at some stage? Madam President, just asking. Madam President, the structure of the loan, I had discussed that and expressed my concern about the structure of the loan, particularly the $100 million loan. And of course, we are adding this one is 40 years. The $121 million loan is over 25 years with a 5-year grace period and 20 years to repay. The loan to the consortium over a period of 20 years. Madam President, we do appreciate the grace period that has been given to give some kind of breathing space before principal payments are made. Madam President, but I am still of the view that perhaps the structure can be revisited, especially now that our fiscal position is under pressure, and perhaps rather than offering to pay the interest payments, maybe some negotiation can happen where the interest can be capitalized, so during the grace period, the government doesn't have to meet any interest costs, but it would be added on at the back end of the loan such that eventually the interest charges will be met. So interest capitalization can be an option to assist government at this point, so that the interest charges, which notwithstanding the rates are low, when you look at the quantum of the debts we are talking about, Madam President, the amounts that government have to find to pay the interest over the period of 5 years in one instance or in 2 instances, I believe it is significant, and there might be an opportunity for us to look at that particular issue. While talking about interest rate, Madam President, I think the leader of government this morning mentioned that the interest rates that are being offered are significantly concessionary, and that the local banking sector will do well to offer government similar pricing. Madam President, I just want to mention here, for the benefit of the leader of government business, that the interest rate offered by any institution, lending institution, is a function of the cost of funds. Madam President, the minimum savings rate that the banks in this jurisdiction pay is 2%. So if a bank pays 2% to depositors on savings, they cannot offer a loan at 1% to the government. That's not good business, it's not prudent business. If the banks have to do that, then they will collapse. And when they collapse, what happens? The hard-earned deposits of St. Lucians that are sitting in the banks will be at risk. So, Madam President, we cannot argue that the banking sector locally just cannot afford to give government such concessions, because the cost of funds do not allow them to be able to do so and still remain viable. Madam President, debt service was a concern for me in previous debates, and it continues to be. I've listened to the argument that this is the best time for us to do the investment. Yes, it is a good time for us to stimulate economic activity, because the atmosphere requires that we stimulate economic activity. However, we have to look at the other side of the coin. revenue flows. We need steady revenue flows to be able to satisfy the loan repayments. The uncertainty that we are experiencing as a country in terms of the economy does not lend itself to give us comfort, Madam President, in terms of our ability to be able to service all these debts. Madam President, as I mentioned, SLASPA is a solid entity. SLASPA has been managing its affairs prudently. However, SLASPA does not have control over all the variables. So the economic realities that we speak of affect SLASPA likewise, because when you examine SLASPA's financial statements, the revenue streams are from the seaports, cruise boats, cargo boats, and what have you. From the airports, the situation has diminished the number of flights coming into the country. And not just the number of flights coming in the country, because of the uncertainty that I speak of, Madam President, we do not know what the tourist inflows will be in the short, medium, and long term. There's just so much uncertainty, Madam President, and that is going to have a direct effect on the revenue flows from the airport. Because when we talk about 45 US head tax per passenger to service the loan, of course, it's no-brainer that the fewer customers you have, the less revenue you collect. So at the end of the day, Madam President, I think we need to be conscious of that. We have to be cognizant of the fact that there's uncertainty around the income flows, and that at the end of the day, I believe we have to exercise the right level of prudence to ensure that after we've invested such a huge quantum in a project, that we will have the capacity to service the loan. And I remember asking the question in that regard, Madam President, on the topic of risk management and risk mitigation relative to that development. What is the fallback position? Because if we find ourselves as a country in a situation where we cannot service the airport loan, what happens? Does the Exim Bank come and repossess the airport? What are we talking about? So I believe there must be comfort around debt service, and I did not hear enough conversation from Madam Leader of Government Business in that regard, and I'd be heartened if she can give some explanation as to how do we mitigate the risk of diminished income as a result of this uncertainty that we are dealing with. So there's that income risk, Madam President. Madam President, I had also asked about cost overruns. Cost overruns in this country is a very bad word, but that's our reality, because most capital projects that we've undertaken in this country have resulted in cost overruns. Cost overruns, sometimes they're legitimate reasons where there are cost overruns. You have weather situation. Look, we are expecting a hurricane, Madam President. That could have implications for what we do in terms of projects that we're implementing. So therefore, Madam President, that element of risk is a real risk that we have to mitigate. So it would be very useful if I am being told or an explanation is given as to how we plan to mitigate the risk of cost overruns. Madam President, with these few remarks and questions, I shall await the response from Madam Leader of Government Business so that I can get better elucidation on those concerns. Thank you, Madam President.
Senators, if you remember that you're only addressing the presiding officer, at all times you're only addressing the presiding officer, you will not address the public gallery or even one another. It's not allowed, it's not correct, though that appears to be the more polite thing. I just want to remind you all of that. Senator Auger.
Thank you, Madam President. While I will not go into a substantial discussion of the matter, I do want to acknowledge the comments made by Senator Francis on the sociology of crime as it is affecting particularly young people in both urban and rural areas. These are dire issues which cross our entire nation, and we need to do more than describe them. We need to have an effective plan for resolving them. Madam President, today we will approve $231 million plus in public borrowing. It will be approved because that is the nature of business in this House. That is the equivalent of $1,285 for every man, woman, and child in this country. In other words, that is the equivalent of $6,500 for every household of 5 persons or less. I'm not saying that we should be borrowing money to hand to households necessarily in those quantities, but I am saying that it gives us an indication of the amount of money that we are mobilizing for public use. And it must therefore, at the rate of $6,500 per household, without interest or fees being considered, it must raise concerns about how the money is to be spent and what impact it will have on households and persons across the island at a time of great uncertainty in our country. Madam President, in terms of the source of the funds for this borrowing, I lend my support. The International Development Association is one of the most concessionary facilities on the planet and offers concessionary terms for long-range financing, specifically to economies like ours, who are not entirely creditworthy for borrowing on commercial markets on large scale. The explanation by the leader of government business on what the money is to be used for was also more detailed than usual, and we are grateful for that. The 5 points that she mentioned specifically are useful, I think, for the population of the country to understand how the money is to be earmarked. I would like to also express satisfaction with the clarity with which the terms are set out in the documents before us. The sum, the grace periods, the rates, how they will apply at different terms, at different times in the life of the loan. Madam President, this is a marked difference from the previous matter, which we did not debate, and which I will not debate now, but which borrows $10.7 million without properly indicating the life of the loan, and without properly indicating that we appear to be borrowing from the CDB on the one hand to pay the CDB on the other hand, monies which we seem not
Senator
able to
Oshie, I
pay.
bring you straight to 37-1, please.
Madam President, thank you. I am making a comparison between two issues. I would ask for your forbearance, Madam President. It is directly related to the borrowing at hand, And I would ask you to bear with me for a few minutes. I will not be long. Is that acceptable, Madam President?
Proceed, Senator Ogier, but remember, it is not a question of comparing, it is a question of whether it deals with the debate at hand.
It is, Madam President, I assure you. So, Madam President, that is the sort of clarity that we would like to see when we bring financial matters before the House. And I would urge that promises given earlier to address the larger picture when we come for borrowings, and to give the people of St. Lucia a summary of where we stand and how we intend to service our debt, that promise should be fulfilled. I remember the previous leader of government business acknowledging the need for this, and if memory serves correctly, I remember the current leader of government business being similarly inclined to give the people of St. Lucia an overview of where the debt stands and how we intend to service it, and in cases where it is relevant, to also indicate whether there is a dedicated revenue stream to which this particular expenditure is devoted. That would be very useful, Madam President, as we go forward with these and other debt matters. Madam President, the idea that we are borrowing enough money to give every household in this country $6,500 is an indication of the resources that we are mobilizing in a regular session of this House, not the first time and not the last time, so that it should be clear, and it should be reasonably clear, that what people are asking for is some clarity. I don't think that is too much to ask. And when we ask this of the government, Madam President, it is the government that should respond, and not the party. It is the government that we are asking these matters of. We are not in the political fray. We are in the business of governance, and we would like the government to respond. Where do we stand? What is the bigger picture with regard to our debt? How will we repay $6,500 for every household of debt, $6,500 debt for every household in this country? That's the figure that sort of brings it to life and makes it understandable and makes it tangible. So we are borrowing today enough money that every household in this country is indebted to the tune of an additional $6,500 before interest or fees or penalties are calculated. That's what regular folks understand. So Cecilia in Fornigua, who's concerned about the borrowing, and Ms. Mary, who spoke to me this morning and says to me, Dio pa prêter plus l'argent souple. These are regular people. These are the people who will be asked to vote in a few months' time. Just give them an explanation of where we stand and how we intend to proceed. And if we would take long enough to stop shouting at each other, we could do that. We could offer some clarity and some hope and some peace. It has been noted before in this House, Madam President, that people are uncertain. People are at risk. All they're asking for is to be included in the great conversation of how money is spent and the things to which it is devoted. That is all. And considering that some of us in this House are going to be going to them to ask them for 5 more years of their loyalty, I think that is a reasonable request. Madam President, economic and social conditions in rural and urban communities at this time cannot be separated. The two are intertwined, irrevocably intertwined. People are considering what their next meal will be and where it will come from, how it will be paid for. Not even next week, today and tomorrow. People are living on the edge. Young men, as was remarked earlier, are idling on street corners, poorly prepared for life, no access to work, missing fathers, frustrated opportunities, hunger, and the perception of too little and too late. That is a recipe for anger. And so we should not be surprised at the explosion of crime in our communities across the island. These are symptoms of a deep malaise in our society, which government alone can mobilize resources to address in any significant way. And this is why we are all so concerned that the economic, the social, the justice, the criminal are all parts of the same formula. They cannot be divided. So the communities that we all go to, Roseman in Pave, the old gentleman in Arundel Hill, the young man in Odlum City who was cut off by his landlord, the young man in Sarot, the elderly gentleman and his wife in Tomazo, the gentleman in Paybush who is housebound in a wheelchair, the family in Mark, in Marigot, the list goes on. We need to look directly at community projects which are going to put cash into hands, which are going to address the community decay that is happening all around us. We could be doing things like community cleanups, conversion of empty lots in neighborhoods, creation of green spaces. We could be looking at grants for self-help projects, home repair, loans. These are the things that are going to make immediate impact on people's lives and put cash into communities. We are not saying not to proceed with infrastructure, Madam President. I totally agree that the time to reposition may well be now, and that there are strategic advantages to be taken at the strategic point that we are, so that we can be better positioned for the future. But the problem, Madam President, is that some people cannot wait for trickle down. Some people will not be here when the economy starts back. Some businesses will disappear permanently. Some jobs will be lost irrevocably. So we do not want to be in a position that when the economy really comes to restart, there is no gas in the engine, there is no carburetor, there is no crankshaft, because it has been so eroded by the current economic circumstances of here and now, today and tomorrow. Some people cannot wait for trickle down. We need some direct interventions beyond the handouts. We need some community projects to put cash in pockets today. I don't know how that appeal needs to be made more fundamentally or more passionately, but that is what is happening in your constituencies around the island. Bloomberg, the U.S. Market Intelligence, Business Intelligence Agency, estimates that in the great United States of America, where billions of dollars are being made available in corporate support, payroll support, unemployment, social support, etc., more than half of the business closures will be permanent. More than half of the business closures will be permanent. We cannot predict that that is the exact parallel in St. Lucia, but we all know that businesses in this country live very close to the edge. They are not deep pockets for the great majority of St. Lucian businesses. Some of us in this house are in business. We know this. So it is important that we have some direct support to business community, to the business community as soon as possible, or there will be nothing left to crank up. Come October, November, December, when the tourism sector is hopefully starting to pick up steam, these businesses will not be in a position to help with the employment of the surplus labor which is now sitting idle in communities across the island. If 50% of our businesses close, and we just take that as notional, that is not gospel, It tells us that we need to diversify our options now. We need to save something for rainy days. We cannot be borrowing constantly and limiting the fiscal space and the fiscal flexibility that we need in times like these. If, heaven forbid, we have a hurricane and there's a storm system on the way, people are increasingly worried about how we will manage through yet another difficulty. If there is a resurgence of COVID, as is extremely likely given the experience of other countries and given the fact that we are importing visitors from one of the most contagious epicenters of this pandemic, then we have to have some flexibility to be able to respond in an emergency. We have had estimates of what the one COVID wave has cost the government and the country. Madam President, it is difficult to see how we would withstand a second wave if that is to happen. The danger, Madam President, as we contemplate this particular use of funds and the quantum of the resources that we are putting into a single area, is that the permanent impact on our domestic economy is irreparable. And that is what we do not want to happen, because, as was mentioned earlier, lives are at stake. Not just businesses, not just sectors, but lives are at stake. Madam President, I want to make a little appeal for a little more attention to the non-hotel accommodation sector in particular, which again is directly related to the fact that we are creating infrastructure to bring visitors in to service those very sectors, to support those very sectors. But the non-hotel accommodation sector, which is typically not inclusive and which therefore has more community impact, is not yet being served. The MICE sector, non-hotel accommodation as in guest houses, Airbnb, condominiums, villas, etc. But more important, I think, is the Airbnb sector, which is a direct injection of funds into local economies, into local accounts. Madam President, as we contemplate this injection of funds into airport infrastructure, let us also remember that there is a whole MICE sector, meetings, incentives, conferences, and events, that remains largely outlawed, might be a strong word, but certainly non-viable because of the protocols which are in place and the difficulties of getting to St. Lucia for many visitors who may be interested in coming to us. I had cause, Madam President, to point out to the CMO only a couple days ago that there is a vital error in the wording of the last statutory instrument, which requires somebody to have a COVID test at least 7 days before travel, when it should be at most 7 days before travel. She was gracious enough to acknowledge that, but it speaks to the importance of accurate drafting so that we do not find ourselves in legal battles over things that we write and implement. Madam President, in closing, I think that the leader of government business has made a valid point about the importance of early education, early childhood education, and how important it is for continuity in the sector in those first 5 years of learning, which numerous studies have indicated are among the most important of the formative years. Early childhood education centers in this country are private. They are largely unsubsidized. Support from government is not substantial, but more importantly, these are locally owned small businesses in the provision of education services. Not all, but the vast majority of them are, which means that they employ people in their communities, and also that their employees are primarily women. And women are typically heads of households in our matriarchal society, so those jobs are extremely important. I believe, Madam President, that it would take very little resources to improve the subsidies to early childhood education centers so that those jobs in vital communities can be preserved. It would take, in fact, very little money to keep those centers going, and those jobs will be there. And the children who are at the most vulnerable stage in the first 5 years and who we do not wish to turn into boys on the block, we must continue to invest through this crisis in their sustainability and their development. Madam President, I believe that brings me to the end of my presentation today, and I would like to thank you very much for your indulgence. Thank you.
Senator Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Madam President. As I rise to support this resolution before us, I wish to express my 100% support for this resolution. Much has been said about it, but Madam President, I am indeed very happy that I can stand here and to support this $45 million US facility, which will directly be beneficial to my firefighters. And I say my firefighters as a former fireman. I spent many years at Hiwanura International Airport attending flights, whether it be in the sun or in the rain. And I know the importance of the fire service to Hiwanura Airport and to Aerodrome in particular. Madam President, I am indeed elated that this facility will, the very same people that we are praising on one hand as essential workers, I am baffled as to how and why the opposition can come to this honorable house and do not approve a facility that is supposed to be affecting the lives of those very same people. So I am indeed elated. It is indeed also a facility. On December 24th, 2013, I witnessed what climate change did to St. Lucia and Hiwanura International Airport in particular. I was at the airport on that day in question when St. Lucia got affected by the Christmas Eve trough of 2013. And Madam President, I mean, it is a history that is well known in St. Lucia of the ravages which the Latuni River, which is officially the Vieux-Fort River, overflowing its banks and caused, and the volume of water that we had on the runway and Virgin Atlantic landing on that airport on that evening, the turbulence that it caused and the waves and the destruction that it caused to Vieux-Fort, going right across Vieux-Fort, destroying the Rubis gas station, and unfortunately we lost one life there. We also had that the effect of that very same water having an effect on the road on the eastern side of the airport. Indeed, Madam President, when I look at our rating by ICAO at 16.27% since 2013, and the opposition is talking about a master plan. Madam President, in 2013, it was not this government that was in office. In 2013, when the opposition spoke about the PPP arrangement, was any arrangement made for the improvement of the east side of Hiwanura? All we were talking about is about the terminal building. But however, the S side is as important as the land side. So I ask the question, it is as important that we do it now. Madam President, if Noah had to wait for the rains to build the ark, nobody would be saved, you know. So it is important that we do the things that ought to be done when it's supposed to be done. I understand the argument. I understand we know what we are facing, but when we get the opportunity, we have to prepare for the future. And I think I must applaud our Honorable Prime Minister at the effort that the Prime Minister has put in terms of the development of the South. I have to continue mentioning it. Madam President, this is another project for the south of the island. And I always call myself the representative of the South because this is where I'm from and this is where I've lived all my life. And I am indeed elated when in this COVID period that we have ITEL BPO that is opening its doors in Vieux-Fort. We are expecting 750 jobs. Ojo Labs is rehiring. We have projects in Vieux-Fort North, the Wasco project. So indeed, I know that the south of the island is well taken care of by a UWP administration. And it is the bedrock of the Labour Party. And it baffles me as to why my district representative and the representative of Vieux-Fort North comes to the House and do not support a bill that has direct benefit to the people of the South. Madam President,
Senator, you don't make reference to members in the House below.
Thank you.
Just to...
Thank you, Madam
If you want
President.
to say something, let it be part of your submission.
Thank you, Madam President.
Proceed.
I seek your guidance. I concur. Madam President, today, as my comrade Senator mentioned, it is the time when we have the least traffic at the airport. And it is the most opportune time when you can take all level of construction that you would want to perform at Hiwanura Airport. Most times, work had to be performed at Hiwanura during the night because Hiwanura is our international airport, and without a doubt, as St. Lucia is clearly dependent on tourism, what we present to our visitors is very important. Not just the nice terminal building, but the safety on the S side is even more paramount than the terminal building. Because you want to make sure that you present a facility in its entirety. And as a fireman, as a former fireman, and I still remain a fireman because if the call comes, I still have to run. That I am indeed happy that because it minimizes the, at least for us, the danger of having a catastrophe at Hiwanura. And you can imagine that we are indeed very lucky that since 2009 that we do not have a proper hospital facility in the south. And this is a big concern because we are very lucky that the International Civil Aviation Organization has not reprimanded us for such. Indeed, Madam President, the time has come when we ought to look at the things that are necessary, and I think I do concur with my fellow senators that have raised the question of borrowing. But in truth and in fact, it is necessary borrowing that will take us into better light in the future. Madam President, I thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I will attempt to, as best as possible, to give as many responses as I possibly can. But Madam President, if you will allow me to indulge just to say that we're looking at borrowing and everything else, just if I can inform my fellow senators that they are invited to, they requested a viewing of the St. Jude Hospital site. And Madam President, I think we'll do that over lunch. Madam President, this borrowing, Madam President, and again, we hear a lot of what we have heard about borrowing before. And I mentioned that I expected to hear some more concerns about the government borrowing. But Madam President, I hear us calling for a number of things to be done. We speak about fiscal space. And of course, bearing in mind, Madam President, that most of the borrowing that is done is either as part of a regional arrangement, or sometimes it is government matching funds from an agency that is assisting us, and so on. And a lot of these areas, that the projects that we are looking at, were already in the plan to be executed during this budget year. So I hear of many requests for concessions for certain agencies and areas that are depressed in this, trying time that we are going through. And then I ask myself, where is the money coming from? Where is the money going to come from to finance the activities that we are asking for, so that we can create economic growth, so that we can take care of the poor, so that we can assist so many that are marginalized, and so many people that are out of pocket as a result of this very pandemic that we are going through right now. We speak of government not having the type of revenue that was forecasted for this budget year because of COVID again. We know that this is a reality. We speak of projects that cannot be undertaken in order to bring in revenue. We know that our tourism sector that we depended on for our livelihood, mostly in St. Lucia, no longer exists. That has been wiped out by COVID. We are also aware that the government is under tremendous pressure to put everything in place: infrastructure, services, training, staff, so that we can contain the virus. We have seen over the last few weeks a complete structure going up at the international airport to facilitate the reopening, tourists coming in, as part of the reopening of our borders. And all of that, Madam President, require that we spend funds that were not budgeted for, because nobody knew that we were going to be experiencing this catastrophic event that is ongoing right now.
Thank God for the tents that the people guys survived.
Thank God for the tents that we already had on island, that we were able to retrofit and provide the service, the necessary service that we are able to provide in reopening our borders. We had to employ additional staff, Madam President, to staff that facility that we have at the Huanora International Airport. Right now, our airports, while we have to open for the few visitors that we have coming in, the overhead cost is still a cost that we have to finance. While we are not making the revenue, we still have to dish out and take care of the expenditure that is required so that we can continue to try to open up more businesses and more places, more hotels. Senator spoke about the Airbnbs. And of course, we sympathize with these businesses that are really under pressure right now. But we must always have COVID at the front of our radar. We are not doing this to punish anyone. If we can open the Airbnbs and the other businesses, we will generate more revenue. Our people will become employed. We will, it's a way of creating the economic activity that we need. But we cannot just jump and do that without regard for the situation that our source markets are the UK, Canada, North America, those very countries where the virus is spiraling out of control. So we are continuing to spend monies that we're not supposed to be spending in those areas, and we are not realizing the revenues that we are expected to realize under normal circumstances. So, Madam President, I'm saying we must borrow. And we are going to continue to borrow as much as is necessary so that we can keep our economy going, so that we can keep our people, our citizens, alive, for lack of a better word. This is the best way I can put it. Our people are going to starve, some of them, if we do not borrow those monies so that we can put into the projects to create economic activity so that our country can remain afloat. And I'm not saying that we ought not to be asking for projects and programs and asking the government to prioritize, yes. But at the moment, when you look at prioritizing, these projects, most of them are not totally financed by the government. And if we allow these projects to go to waste, we don't finance our part of it. We are actually depriving our citizens and our economy from growing. So we really need at this point in time to understand what is behind the borrowing. Of course, my government, Madam President, has always maintained that we will not borrow unless there is a revenue stream. And that has always been the intention, Madam President. But given this situation now, we are experiencing expenditure that we did not cater for due to the COVID virus. However, this borrowing that we are doing is we are continuing to maintain that the revenue stream is the $45 US that's coming from airport transactions and so on. So the intention is there to maintain that revenue stream, right? But if the tourists are not coming, okay? So we have to go ahead with the project, knowing that we are opening our borders, and the planes must get a runway to land on. The current runway is unstable at best. We also have to mitigate the flood issues that you heard our former fireman and current senator speak of. So one might say it's a chicken and egg situation, but we are very positive that our Ministry of Health so far has been able to, and of course all the frontline workers, our government, our people of St. Lucia, we have been able to so far contain the virus. We have now partially opened our borders, and we are going to continue to be positive and hopeful that that plan can continue to be realized so that we'll get to the point where we embrace the new norm, living with COVID, and at the same time growing our economy. So, Madam President, it is not a deliberate thing that we are just borrowing. The borrowing is going towards, it is structured, it is going towards projects that are well-intended and projects that are necessary at this point in time. Madam President, it's too bad that the leader of opposition business has left, but I believe that my fellow senator mentioned, answered most of the questions that he was asking, Madam President. Madam President, we speak often about the youth. We speak about the youth. The youth did not just spring up today. We were all youth at one point. And even after we are gone, there's still going to be youth. But while some of us speak about the youth, when we come to this very house, Madam President, to borrow money that is going to impact positively on the youth, borrow money that is going to create employment and keep them active and keep them gainfully employed, Madam President, we get a lot of objection, and it is only then that we remember the youth, the youth. Sometimes when I listen to the opposition, I wonder if there were any youth during their reign, because they make you think that it is only now that the youth has emerged somewhere, and we need to put things in place for these new youths that are just emerging. We've always had youths, Madam President. And the youth are no worse off today than they were when the former administration was in office. At least now we hear of the sports academy. We know government has moved to assist the care school. Madam President, we hear of all these things like the call centers, and all of that is geared towards assisting the youth, Madam President. So it's not like the Ministry of Youth and Sports. I know they have a complete new program for youth, and all the sporting activities and programs in schools for youth. So, Madam President, youth did not just spring up yesterday, and they are there only under a United Workers' Party administration, Madam President. So we have to be concerned about the youth, of course, but I believe that we have to view this as a social construct. Madam President, we speak about the youth, especially when we speak about crime, right? But all these things were always there. And if we do not look at our social programs, it is only going to continue to get worse, Madam President. We have a section of society that we call single mothers. Madam President, where on this earth have you ever seen a woman making a child by herself? Where do we know that women conceive children on their own? We have children without fathers. Madam President, every child has a father. Every child has a father. And it is for us as a society to call on these fathers to take care of their children, do the right thing. If you cannot take care of children, do not have children. Because you are bringing little people into this life and you are subjecting them to misery, to perpetual misery. And that in itself is wrong. That in itself ought to be a crime, Madam President. So we in society, we need to look at these constructs and see where is it that we ourselves are contributing to the social ills of society. This is what we have to do. We cannot hold a government responsible for all the things that are happening when it comes to youth in our society. When a child is born, Madam President, and this child comes into the world without a father, how can a child come into the world and how does the mother, what is it that the single mother is supposed to do with this child? You have no father. How does anyone understand themselves with that kind of dilemma? You cannot have a child, Madam President, without a father. And these people in society who are always shouting and ranting and raving when bad things happen to young people, that is what they ought to be looking at. That is what they ought to be taking care of. Even the Black Lives Matter movement, I saw a lot of people, Madam President, with placards. We are borrowing money to make life better for everybody. We have a COVID situation, Madam President. We have those same persons, Black Lives Matter, who have children that they are not taking care of. And we come in this house and speak about the youth, those very same youth, stemming out of these households that do not have fathers, these households with single mothers. So, Madam President, we must first call on these fathers to take care of their children. And sometimes I blame my fellow women too, but I think that is for another time, Madam President. Since we are talking about youth, and of course, opposition senators spoke about early childhood education, and so did our independent senator. And of course, we agree that these are very sensitive areas, Madam President. And I know that my government has been considering looking at a subvention for some of these centers, okay? But of course, look at what COVID has done. At a time when we were experiencing growth, and we were on the path of, you know, fully taking care of our deficit and so on, Madam President, we had quite a few plans in terms of what we were going to do to assist some of these early childhood education centers. Those, of course, who are operating within the criteria that the Ministry of Education set. But with this virus, Madam President, I believe almost all the revenue that we can divert from other projects, Madam President, is really going into healthcare. And as the Minister of Health, I can tell you that sometimes the Treasury is really scratching to find money, to put more money into this whole COVID response. Madam President, the independent senator spoke of speaking to the CMO about at least 7 days to travel, getting the certificate, at least 7 days to travel. And he said it ought to be at most 7 days to travel. But I want to point out to him that in most countries, when you do the test, you do not, because of the number and the volume of people that are applying for the COVID test in those countries, they do not get the results before 7 to 8 days. And sometimes we actually have to allow American Airlines to come with 1 or 2 persons who are waiting for their results, but their flight is already there. But when they get here, they have to sign off to agree. Before they board the plane, they have to sign off and agree to get the test when they get here. So we quarantine them from the airport, test them, and then, you know, life goes on. But they must get the certificate, and the certificate takes 7 to 8 days to get the result. The test takes 7 to 8 days to get the result. Okay? Most places in the States it's 8 days. And you are looking at our nationals coming back home. So we really don't have it perfected, but it is something that we are continuing to work on, because we must protect our people in St. Lucia at all costs. We speak about surplus labor that is already available and is going to continue to be available for a while. But, Madam President, if we do not borrow to create economic activity, where will that surplus labor go to? How can we assist? What can we do? We need to continue to create programs that are going to create economic activity. That is the key, because we must keep our people employed, we must keep them working, we must keep them fed. And that is what is critical right now. So the projects, Madam President, are really assisting us to do just that. And people don't just want to sit around and for you to give them handouts. They want to be gainfully employed. And of course, as you know, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So we want our people to be meaningfully engaged. Madam President, and of course, we've dealt with the fiscal space, creating fiscal space. Of course, some of these loans that we speak about is assisting us to create fiscal space. Because then when we take the loan, we have whatever little revenue we are getting, we can use it to do the other things that we have to finance ourselves. Because there are certain things that government has to do that you cannot finance with loans from institutions, right? I do not think that any bank is going to loan you money to run your recurrent expenditure. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we use the little money, the little revenue that we are getting right now. Madam President, I believe that I have tried to cover as much as I could have written down, but of course we can always dialogue about any other issues that I may not have covered. We spoke about cost, the cost of these projects. Of course, the resolutions always are very clear. They speak about the terms of the loans, the duration of the loans, the grace period, and so on and so forth. And they also speak of what exactly it is that they are going to be used for. I know independent senators spoke about cost overruns, but I do not know that anyone can accommodate, can prepare for cost overruns, because I know that there is usually a percentage in your costing for any contingency. But in terms of cost overruns, nobody looks forward to having cost overruns on the project. And I do not know that this is something that anybody or any agency budgets for, cost overrun. But of course, I know there is a contingency, okay, but it can be for whatever, okay? There can be other costs that come up during the life of the project that you can use your contingency fund on, right? So nobody really budgets for what we call cost overrun. Okay, Madam President, thank you very much.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow an amount of US $45 million from the International Development Association for the purpose of financing the Caribbean Regional Air Transport Connectivity Project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable on the unwithdrawn financing balance of 0.5% per annum. B, a service charge is payable on the withdrawn credit balance that is equal to the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 10-year grace period. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each first day of April and first day of October of each year, commensurate with 1% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2030, 2, and including the first day of April 2040, and 2% of the loan amount commencing on the first day of October 2040, 2, and including the first day of April 2060. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move for the suspension of this House for about 1 hour for lunch. We will get back at, well, 1 hour from now.
Senators, the question is that this House be suspended for 1 hour for lunch. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senate suspended.
The Senate has just been suspended 1 hour for lunch. So at about 2:15, we will see the resumption of the Senate sitting later this afternoon. Meantime, we just want to give you some information, the latest information coming from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. St. Lucia records case number 24 of COVID-19. We're getting word that on Thursday, July 22nd, that is today, the Ezra Long Laboratory of the Owen King EU Hospital reported that from a batch of 60 tests conducted, there was one positive case of COVID-19. The individual is a 59-year-old female who arrived in St. Lucia on July 10th, 2020. Upon return to St. Lucia, she was placed in institutional quarantine and was tested 7 days later as per quarantine protocol. Upon receipt of the results, the individual has been transferred to the respiratory hospital for isolation and related supportive care, as she is currently doing well. The Ministry of Health was also informed by the St. Vincent Health Ministry of a St. Lucian national who traveled to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines on Sunday, July 19th, 2020, and after screening was tested positive for COVID-19. Currently, the Ministry of Health and Wellness in St. Lucia is investigating the matter and is in the process of undertaking contact tracing for this individual. The Ministry of Health and Wellness once again reiterates the importance of quarantine for returning nationals and visitors, as it is a great measure in minimizing the risk of transmitting COVID-19. It is with this that we ask people to adhere to the 14-day quarantine time, and for those in home quarantine to stay there for the full period of time. This action is expected to protect the health and safety of every individual within our country. So there you have it, a word of the 24th case confirmed here in St. Lucia of the coronavirus.
Suspend pour yon éditeur nous avons Sénat combien savent il a fait décision côté niveau fait puis gouvernement a prêté l'argent pour développement airport avec nous une discussion quand il pour faire ça mais parmi développement nous on est fermé ici à Carrefour savent nous ni en l'autre cas les venir pour Covid avec nous demander mon accord pour prendre précaution les venir pour ça bonne nouvelle lancée protocole qui est en place à empêcher ça s'immerger quand nous avons Sénat qui a vié ici à messieurs dames dans yon éditeur quand nous avons un gouvernement qui a acheté permission pour prêter l'argent pour plus développement expressement les niveaux fait pour vier mes pays à sous-payer pour recouvrir l'économie pour Jesse et puis moi qui sorti ici un bon matin cadeau ni un bon journée avec vieux journée puis nous ici les bagages qui continuer plus tard. Merci tellement.
And with that, we take you back into studio until the reconvening of Parliament, the sitting of the Senate this afternoon at about 2:15. Stay tuned.
Do you have a question for a government minister or ministry? Here's your chance to ask anything. Send in your questions as videos or text to askmeanythingntn@gmail.com, and we will have your questions answered live on NTN Channel 122. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube for more updates and your chance to ask anything.